you have medium or smaller sized cities, you don't need one-way pairs. Yeah.
Well, so what are we stuck with? We're stuck with DOT officials who have been the same officials for the last 40 years through the ebb and flow of Democrat and Republicans.
Well, you know,
And they're
there's
still
a
the same
difference.
people.
There's a difference. One Democrat really stuck his neck out and tried to change the culture at the DOT, and that was Pat Lucy from Ferryville. Tony Earl thought the highway building was like part of the New Deal. You know, he was for it. And Doyle appointed the head of the Teamsters Union, head of the DOT. He kind of likes highways. So, you know, I mean, the Democrats, they have a political culture that's more likely to produce critical analysis of the road building thing. The Republicans, you'd think they would look at it in terms of value, you know, value added. If a Republican really cares about, you know, say, using taxpayer money where it gets the biggest yield in return, then they would be for the street grid, because that's where capitalism happens. They would be for doing things that create more value.
But they said Doyle took it out of the transportation pot and made it the general pot, and that's what screwed up everything. I mean, then we had nothing to go in, we have no money in there, transportation.
Well, I mean, sometimes though, you have to think, thank God they don't have money, because if they did, they'd be spending it on some really bad stuff, so.
They can't even fix a pothole, so I'm not that happy.
But it, you know, in Europe and Canada, the gas tax funds the general budget, and their gasoline prices are a lot higher. And that has all kinds of benefits that are not very apparent during an election campaign, but it's really good economics. The idea that the segregated highway fund, you know, becomes like the personal property of the contractors who get the money out of it, that's the way they look at it. Or another way to see a phenomenon like that in Detroit, for years, all of the block grant money has gone to demolition, because the demolition contractors hung around the Detroit City Council like parasites, you know, and they assumed that all that money, it's like 60-some million a year, is their personal property. So, you know, I mean, there's this sort of special interest thing that dominates the whole transportation thing. But I was starting to see David Kramer, who's the second biggest road builder in Wisconsin. He got the contract to do the high-speed rail line between Milwaukee and Madison in Jefferson County. And he said, well, you know, I can make money on this too. And I thought that was really healthy that a road builder started to think like that. But then, you know, something happened. Was it Chris Christie or some guy trying to mimic Chris Christie? I forgot. But anyway. All right.
I wonder, can you just offer some comments on the politics of high-speed rail and what you think is going on with that situation, why it's become so polarized in Wisconsin especially?
Well, it is kind of weird because, like, in Salt Lake City, which is Salt Lake City is actually Democratic. It's the only place in Utah that voted for Obama. He won there by 1.5%. But, you know, Utah's the most Republican state of all. Utah has, in the Salt Lake Valley, the valley where Salt Lake is, they have the fastest growing commuter rail system, the fastest growing light rail system. The light rail is now over 100 miles, and the commuter rail between Ogden and Provo, there's 28 round trips a day. I mean, that's like New York City kind of service. And the Mormons embraced all that stuff because they thought it was good for them, and that they were ruining too much land by just having everything spread out. And so they put that stuff in place, and it's working. The mayor of Mesa, Arizona, Scott Smith, is the front runner for governor, for the next governor of Arizona. And he's the biggest supporter of rail transit in Arizona. I think some of it is, it's wedge politics. I mean, if you're running for office in Waukesha County, you know, and if you're running, particularly if you're running for the legislature where it's very partisan and you've got the Republican primary basically deciding everything, the one who waves the bloody shirt about Milwaukee the most, they're gonna come and get you, you know, whatever. They're the ones who win the primary. So, and Scott Jensen, who's sort of the Karl Rove of Wisconsin politics, he really exploited that a lot, and it created that attitude. And he went to Harvard, and he rode the red train all the time at Harvard Square. He knows, that it's a nice, convenient thing to have. But it's wedge politics. And I'm not saying the Democrats never do wedge politics, but on this kind of issue, this is where they focus it.
But you had the big federal government in it, right? I mean, the big federal government. In other words,
Well,
you can't
but this
just do it
big
in the
government
state.
stuff is kind of big. If somebody doesn't like something, they say that's big government. If they like something, they say it's a really smart investment.
But
And it, like
light
unions,
rail, with the
who
light
likes
rail.
unions, who doesn't like you? I'm a Democrat, I'm supposed to be a liberal. I got elected mayor of Milwaukee 4 times without AFSCME, without the police union, without the municipal unions, because I was negotiating contracts with them. I didn't look at it as my job is to try to figure out how to have their stamp of approval. I was supposed to represent the taxpayers. Tommy Thompson, who's a friend of mine, but, personal friend, but when he was elected governor 4 times, twice he was endorsed by the state employees union. So who's the toady for the unions? Well, Scott Walker eliminated the municipal unions except the 2 unions that backed him in the election, the police union and the fire union. Somehow unionization's really good for them because they backed them. That's the law of the jungle. So, why do people do stuff? It is a little scary in America right now. There's sort of a whiff of fascism in the air. It's kind of reminiscent of the 20s and 30s in Europe, particularly on the right. The left hasn't quite gotten that. Maybe if the right gets big enough, the left will start
Wait a
acting
minute,
like that
I'm
too.
right. Yeah.
It's okay to be.
I want less big government, believe it.
Yeah, well, me too. Yeah.
How about small mitigation steps like no taxes for the next 10 years on new development or small steps like that?
I don't think you should give tax breaks or subsidies to development. I stopped it in downtown Milwaukee, in 1997. We stopped all subsidies in the downtown, and we had a blooming of development in the downtown. Because the small developers can't afford a lobbyist. They don't know what a TIF district is. There are times when it's important to do that stuff, I'll admit. There's always exceptions. But when I was in the legislature in 1976, I voted against the TIF law. I never think, when you do a subsidy, it's like you're saying to the developer, our city is so shitty that we have to bribe you to come and do something here. That's part of the message, and it's a problem. It's stigmatizing to have subsidies. So, I'm not saying there's never an occasion when Tom Barrett gave a small subsidy to Manpower to put their headquarters in downtown Milwaukee. The press all called me up and said, hey, your successor is subsidizing Manpower. I said, well, it probably makes sense to do that. And I'm not gonna criticize him because that was a pretty good move for Milwaukee. But, as a general rule, it's a bad idea. It just creates more inefficiency in the economy and doesn't really do that much. Yeah.
Last question over here.
Communities, what would your position be on taking every 10th street and making it bike zone and local traffic?
Well, I don't think you could make it, it depends on the city.
Let's say right here, across.
Right here, I think that if people live on that street, they're gonna have to be able to drive on it.
Of course.
Yeah, the local traffic, yeah. Yeah, but I think if you do it, I think you have a bike plan, and the bike plan, if it focuses too much on creating bike trails, which cost money, but the bike trails are good, they're important. I've been on the Elroy Sprawl Trail, all that stuff. But your streets, what you do with your streets, making as many of them or all of them bike friendly, that's really important. And you can do that by restraining lane widths. You can do it by having those little indicias in the street with a stamped bike, and help people remind. There's inexpensive ways to do things. If you really get a lot of bikers, you can, like Copenhagen, where they have sections of the street set off for bikes. But Copenhagen didn't start out that way. Jan Gell, the big planner from there, he could tell you that in 1970, almost nobody was riding a bike. But they gradually built up the bike infrastructure to the point where people were comfortable doing it.